Hi everybody, welcome to another video on the Green Malt. I'm Chris, and today we're going to be talking about Glengoyne. Start out by saying, spoiler alert, I'm a big fan of Glengoyne and everything that they've produced, that I've tasted anyway. In fact, so much so that I wanted to do originally a video where I did a vertical review of 4 of their releases, moving through the 10, 12, 15, and 18-year-old. To compare them and talk about how they change with maturation and time. But the more I thought about that, the more I realized I'm not going to be able to do that justice in one video, not without going on forever. So instead, I think I'm going to do it in a series. So this is going to be the first of a few. It'll be sort of a standard video today as I ramble on a little bit about the distillery itself, but then it'll be followed up hopefully fairly shortly thereafter by a series of relatively condensed videos that work their way up the range and talk about how they've changed and differ, and you know, a little comparison, little vertical review of the Glengoyne distillery. I think it'll be fun. But for today, I want to start with the 10-year-old. And before we do that, let's talk about Glengoyne. So Glengoyne is a Highland distillery, but they are notable for being a Highland distillery that ages their whiskies in lowland warehouses. And the reason for that is because they're located just outside of Glasgow, and they're located along a road that is the delineating point between the Highlands and the Lowlands. So their distilleries built north of that road in the Highlands, and their warehouse is built south of that road in the Lowlands. Other than that, they warehouse their stuff in old style dunnage warehouses. They don't color any of their whiskey, which is something. And they are, as they say on the label, very proud to be the slowest distiller in Scotland. And by that I mean it takes the spirit the longest amount of time to condense and work its way through the still. And that is supposed to help them capture all of the flavors and various tasting notes present in the barley malt that they use when they go through the distillation process. So, another little tidbit. They're an older distillery. They were fired up in 1833 originally, but about 2004, 2005, I think, they were bought by Ian MacLeod Company, so they're now an independent, family-owned producer, and hey, whatever they're doing a great job at it, so keep going. And the last thing to really note with them is that they use zero peat. And again, it's another thing they put on their label. They are not peated. Historically, they believed that they wanted to capture the spirit of the area in which they produced, and in that area of Scotland there was no peat, so all of their barley is air dried. You're not going to get any phenolic notes, no peat smoke, no nothing. But for me, I don't miss it. I'm not a huge peat monster myself, so to each their own, I guess. But it's another point of pride for them. So the 10-year-old, like all of their at least age statement whiskeys, they're aged in sherry casks. So I would expect in all of them to get some sort of sherry influence, but it goes without saying that that influence would increase with time. With this particular release, what do they say? They talk about having green apples, toffee, and nuttiness on the nose. Well, I guess we'll see about that. Oh man, and I haven't even started drinking yet. That's probably not a great sign. Anyway, I think as I mentioned earlier, all of their whiskeys are natural colors. So being sherry aged, I don't know how well this shows up in the camera, but it's really a dark, sort of a dark hay gold type of color. It's not the really deep, rich, dark color that you see in older sherry cask aged whiskeys. On the nose, and I'll say this has been open now for about 10 or 15 minutes in the glass, just a few drops of water in it. It's very sweet. Honey and caramel come through for sure. I can definitely see the apple that they're talking about, at least on the nose, but I also get a lot of pear and a little underlying hint of dark chocolate. So apple and pear, maybe not a lot of fruit. It's very, I get the sense that I'm missing something. So it's very subtle, but I don't know. That's all I can pull out. Hmm. The other thing that I find, at least personally, interesting about Glengoyne is that when you talk about being a very slowly distilled spirit, I would expect that to equate into a more delicate and light-bodied spirit, much in the same way that Glenmorangie talks about their tall stills and that helping them to produce a very delicate spirit. I would have thought that the end result is lighter, more delicate, but that's not the case at all. It's light and refreshing in this iteration of it in taste, but in sort of texture and body and mouthfeel and all of those really fun to say things, it's kind of hefty. It's got some weight. It's got some substance to it. So that's kind of cool. But the palate is very, very much in keeping with the nose, right? So on the nose, we talked about sweetness, honey, caramel. I mean, I guess you could say toffee, depending on what your own association and concept of those things are. Some green light fruits, right? I mentioned apple. I don't really see it as being green apple, at least. I think it's more like a Macintosh baking apple. Definitely some pear type stuff in there. And that comes through again on the palate. Very, very sweet honey caramel right up front on the arrival. Yeah, it's definitely more like a cooked apple than a raw apple to me. But what I find most interesting about this whiskey is it's sweet and it's fresh up front, but as it works through the developments into the finish, the sweetness really dissipates. And I'm sorry, I'm trying to think of the best way to describe it. As you work through the development to the finish, it becomes tart. To me, a tart, lemony, kind of lemon drop, maybe an unsweetened lemon curd type of taste. And there's a lingering little spiciness to it, kind of a cinnamon spiciness to go with an underlying malty sensation as well. And the more I sip it, the more I think that there is that underlying malt throughout the entire tasting experience, and it's just overwhelmed at the beginning by the sweetness, so you don't get it, but once it diminishes, that's what's left, right? It's that kind of tart, fresh tart citrus note to go with the maltiness, to go with that really light spiciness. But really, I mean, the star of the show is that punch up front of fresh, sweet fruit. But not the same kind of fruit you expect out of a sherry-aged whiskey, right? You talk about sherry-aged whiskeys. If you think Glenfarclas or you think Aberlour, it's really the dried fruits, the dried red or dark fruits, your raisins, sort of figs, dried plums, dried cherries. Those are what I would expect out of many sherry-aged whiskeys, but not present here really at all. I think the only influence on this whiskey that I really associate with sherry is that underlying dark chocolate that I smelled on the nose and that I don't really get all that much of on the palate. Mm. Yeah, maybe a little bit upfront, but it's one of those underlying secondary things that's kind of buried by the other notes. So yeah, it's a pleasant sipping whiskey. It's to me very much like a Glenfiddich in your experience, right? Like when I talked about the Glenfiddich 12, it is fresh. This has definitely got a little bit of more heft to it, a little bit more body, but like that, it's fresh. It's kind of refreshing flavor profile. It's very approachable, very easy. There's no smoke, very little spice at all, little lingering spice on the finish, but that's it. The primary difference is where I find the Glenfiddich 12 kind of muddled in its flavor profile. I find this subtle, not particularly complex, but well made. If I had one real criticism of it as a 10-year-old whiskey, I think it might just be that there's a little bit of a sensation of youth. That might sound a little silly maybe, but when I say that, I mean it feels like it needs slightly more time aging. And I think that's something that we'll talk about as we move up in the age range of Glengoyne products, but there's a slightly alcoholic burn, a slight sense of youth to this that just, I don't know, it feels to me that it just slightly too young, but again, it's a minor quibble, realistically. When I picked this up about 6 months ago for the first time, I think I paid $48 in the LCBO here in Ontario, which for a Scotch with an age statement on it is a remarkably good price. Since that time, as I said, about 6 months ago, it's gone up about 50%. It's now somewhere in the 70 odd, $74, $75 range, which, you know, sad to say here is not an unreasonable amount of money to pay for a 10-year-old whiskey, but man, it was a fantastic bargain the first go round. So sad to see those times go, but whatever. I mean, hey, they're in it to make money, so I can't fault them for that. One more sip. So, Glengoyne 10, fresh, it's refreshing. Don't go into it expecting a ton of complexity. I really hope you're not expecting peat smoke or spice, but you know, fresh fruit, some baking fruits, some sweetness, an underlying sense of maltiness and chocolate. It's just a nice whiskey, all in all. As I said, it's not without its minor flaws, and you know, it's not going to blow everyone's socks off, but I think it's right in that ballpark of like an 80 out of 100 type of whiskey, right? Like I said, with the against the Glenfiddich, I should say, the Glenfiddich 12. It's a similar taste experience in the very broadest sense, but it's taken up a few notches. Definitely a worthwhile whiskey to try, especially if you're newer to Scotch. And it's a great entryway into Glengoyne. For me, it's probably my least favorite of their range, and I'm still very happy to have it in my liquor cabinet. So I think that says something about their products in general. And yeah, we'll see as we move through it how the time and maturation really benefits their whiskeys, particularly as sherry aged whiskeys. I just think they must have some very good quality casks, quite frankly, because they're just better and better as you go along. So anyway, thank you for watching, and see you guys with the next time up with the Glengoyne 12-year-old. Cheers.